Good morning, everybody. So good to see you guys. Excited about the word that we get to teach and preach today. Pastor Josh has been asking me to speak for some time, and I have had so many balls in the air that I have dodged it, and wasn't sure I'd get to do today. I had an event that I was thinking I would be at in Arkansas. So I'm back in the saddle today, and it's such an honor to be back with Hope Point, bringing some word today. I want to begin by just celebrating Sabotage, this series that Pastor Josh has been in. What a great series. The word sabotage means an undermining of a cause. An undermining of a cause. I don't know if you've ever experienced the feeling of, I try so hard, and somewhere down the line, there's a sabotage. Sometimes it's a self-sabotage. At the very root of every sabotage, at the very root of everything that seems to undermine our cause, is anxiety. Anxiety. And anxiety is a virus. Now, in the days we live in with the COVID pandemic, we're very familiar with a virus and that it creates a pandemic. And when you have a virus and you have a pandemic, you have to rearrange everything. You reorganize, you figure out plans, structures, all the different mechanisms around that virus. And a virus is contagious, obviously. It moves from one person to another. Did you know that in every relationship you have, what makes it unstable is, guess, anxiety. Anxiety is what causes you and your marriage to have instability. It's what causes you and your best friends to at times have instability. It's what causes you and your organization, in your boardrooms, to actually have instability. What's wild is when we talk about this virus, even in a boardroom, whoever has the greatest anxiety usually hijacks the meeting. In a family, whoever's presenting the greatest anxiety usually has the direction of that family, at least in that moment. And yet it is so covert. It's like a virus that's invisible. You don't know it's there. Many of the things that we do that is driven by anxiety, we are completely 100% unaware that it's even happening in us. We just think we're doing and acting and living and all that kind of stuff, not realizing that there is a generator. There's something on the inside of us that is driving that anxiety. I think about my own story and how many of you have background that I struggled with panic attacks. Well, panic attack seems to be more of a headliner scenario. My panic attacks would get so bad that there were a few occasions that I felt like my brain had become jelly and that I wasn't sure when I woke up in the morning if I would be normal. So I have had extreme cases of panic. But did you know that there are much more subtle forms of anxiety that are equally driving our lives? Maybe not as a headliner, but certainly it's showing up in what we would call your personality. When we think of this virus, I reflect and think about how I present it. I remember sitting one time with a high caliber leader, had a lot of, influence in a particular group, and he was previously a deputy sheriff, and in his case, he was in a particular area where he loved to throw power around and would go into places that he didn't need to be in, and he bragged on it later. He would go into these places and pick up his Jimmy stick or whatever you call that thing, and he would start pounding tables, and he would get everybody's attention and intimidate people. And there wasn't any reason. Even when he got a little further and became a pastor and then reflected back, even as a pastor, he would say, I miss the good old days where police could do police work. And I got to say, that's toxic. That is toxic. And in fact, this guy was a classical narcissist. The trauma wounds of his past caused him to present in a way where he would control and dictate and dominate and intimidate anybody around him. I remember bringing some of my friends and wanted to introduce him. And I would introduce to this particular person, and when I did, He would get quiet, and he would be methodic in what he would say, very stoic and measured, put a smile on his face. But the friends of mine would say, I don't know what it is about him, and they would even nervously tell me later about it. He just makes me so intimidated. It's interesting because there's a virus there, a virus where one person's anxiety is compelling him to control, dictate, be a narcissist. His anxiety is causing him to have a transfer of intimidation. And the person that I'm talking with, they are breathing the air of that virus, and they're getting intimidated. Anxiety comes up, and they're like, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to say. And so they say, this is what often would happen. They would say, I say the stupidest things to him. One time he and I were hanging out together, and it was the only time that I really remember this quality of vulnerability in him, which in classical narcissism, vulnerability isn't a feature you see. But this person decided that they would be vulnerable. I don't know how we got to this moment, but I was a very trusted confidant of his and probably his best friend. And as he is sharing, he is bragging on me. So wild. He's bragging on me because when we would go into pastor circles, you know, where a bunch of preachers are hanging out, a conference, some kind of an event, I would work the room, baby. I would go from person to person. I'd slap backs. I would smile, shake hands. I'm working the room. And he is sharing with me how inspiring that is to him, how interesting it is, and that he likes watching me do that. And I said to him in a moment of vulnerability, and of course, if you've been around me, I don't have a problem with it. And so I say to him, I said, well, you know, there is a good form of doing that, a healthy reasoning behind doing that. For me, it's a mechanism to manage or control or have the illusion of fixing the anxiety that's just boiling on the inside. I said, the reason that I slap backs and smile is it gives me the feeling of I'm in control of what's happening in the moment. The unpredictability of not doing that is that somebody might say something to me and I don't know what to do with it. And I hate those moments. So if I keep the power, I can control it. What's interesting is when he heard that, he said, you know, the reason that I have an upper hand and the reason that I intimidate people is because of my anxiety. I was shocked. I was shocked that he would even come open and clean about that. So we have anxiety that is on the inside of each of us. It's viral. Whenever I get anxious, I'm going to take control by being hyper encouraging. I'm going to notice things. And he is going to intimidate because he wants the power and the control of that moment for the illusion of it's a mechanism of managing anxiety. Anxiety is such an interesting thing. In Scripture, we see that the Apostle Paul says, don't be anxious about anything. I'm wondering, are you feeling anxious right now? Are you? Do you know that during the pandemic that the CDC has shown that there's been an increase of over 40%? In fact, when I talk to my therapist colleagues, I'm not a therapist, but they are colleagues, when I speak to them, they have an increase of, some are having 15 plus clients, new clients, desiring to have a relationship with a therapist, but the therapist doesn't have any more openings. That's common. I'm curious, are you feeling anxious right now? Some of you have a mild irritation about something. Right now, I mean, during the service already today, you were thinking to yourself, I don't like something. I don't like the temperature. I don't like the way they're doing the lights. The video that was behind the songs, I don't know that I like that. I wish that they had, and I don't know that I like the way that part of the music, and I don't know that I like that part of sound. I don't know that I just want to suggest to you, not invalidating whatever you like or don't like, But whatever is manifesting that is irritating you, let me introduce you to a thing called anxiety. As we walked around the lobby, as you walked up, anxiety is actually at work. And yet he tells us here, don't be anxious about anything. Don't be anxious about anything. And then you have verses like this where Jesus is talking. And Jesus says, so do not worry, saying, what are we going to eat? What are we going to drink? What are we going to wear? For the pagans. You don't want to be a pagan. Pagan. Don't you just think that's a bad name? I'm surprised that some football team hadn't captured that as their team mascot, the pagans. For the pagans run after all these things. There is anxiety compelling them to run. What's interesting is that Paul writes, don't be anxious about anything. Here, don't worry. Both are from the exact same Greek word. The exact same word that our English word is translated as anxious or worry. And he tells us, the first one, don't be anxious about anything. And I just mentioned a little bit of irritation. I mentioned, it could mention things like frustration. I could talk about how you manifest with oversharing or drama. But I also want you to consider that there are things that we worry about with what we're going to eat, what we're going to drink, what we're going to wear. And it could be because we don't have anything, and we're like, I don't know where the next meal's coming from. Or it could be that we are very particular about what we want to eat and drink. Y'all ever had somebody give you a gift card to a restaurant, and you're like, I don't like that restaurant? Why? Why? Now, I have to say that if you've given me a gift card to a restaurant, I'm pretty good with all of them. So just... But have you ever gone to a Thanksgiving dinner and you are excited about a particular item? Maybe you're a turkey person and they brought ham. Or maybe somebody's like, we're abandoning turkey and ham. We're going to do something like pigeons. I am from Arkansas. So, but he's telling us, don't worry about these things. In other words, you and I are going to have a lot of opportunities to have a lot of worry. What's interesting when I think about worry, and I'm asking you, are you worried right now? Worry and anxiety could be things like manifesting, ruminating thoughts or catastrophizing. You know what catastrophizing is? That's where something happens and immediately you take it 100 miles down the road as fast as you can and you believe that we're all about to die. Just because they didn't bring pumpkin pie to your Thanksgiving dinner. We will not survive. Maybe it has to do with you just overthink everything. Or maybe you exaggerate. Maybe you have a racing mind. Maybe it's grandiosity. Did you know that pastors, which I am one, pastors often will present grandiosity. In fact, one of my colleagues, Dr. Todd Bowman, who's a part of Red Ink Revival, he is the assessing psychologist for seminarian applications. So seminarian, people who are going to seminary to take a personality assessment, see where they are. The number one thing that shows up with people wanting to be pastors is grandiosity. What is grandiosity? It's I have this deep anxiety that I've got to do something amazing. I've got to hustle. I got to grind. I got to get it done because I'm going to change the freaking world in Jesus' name. Never slowing down to ask the question, what's generating this intensity? It's the call of God. Bless God, bless God, bless God. Maybe. Or it could be that you've had so many wounds in your life that performance, if you just were able to make a difference in God's kingdom, that finally your life would be worthy. Finally, you could have survival. Finally, you could belong. That doesn't have to be preachers. In fact, I would guess that anybody who is a high capacity person, anybody who has big vision, there is a tendency towards grandiosity. What if you're a people pleaser? Anybody in here a people pleaser? Yep. And if somebody just elbowed you and you smiled back, you're a people pleaser. Are you hyper encouraging? I'm just an encourager. Well, the question is why are you an encourager? Encouragement's good. We have a lot of biblical examples of encouragement. The Holy Spirit's an encourager. I don't think he's nervous about it. Hyper encouraging is where I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. Y'all ever gotten around a little kid that, can't say much? It doesn't have words. And you start bringing more intense emotion and get down in their faces and they're like, hey, how are you doing? And they don't know what to do, so they just point. Don't you wish we had that kind of an out as an adult? Every uncomfortable moment. You're like, I don't even know what you're pointing at. They don't either, right? They don't either. Oversharing. You just have needy reassurance. Maybe you hide. A lot of people, when they're anxious, they just hide. They try to get away from the limelight. They try to get out of the intersections of where there might be a social moment that anxiety rises. Could be envy and strife. You know what envy and strife is? Envy and strife is where I am desiring to control a moment and the anxiety is so big, the only way I know to do it is to take your choice and sell you, control you, manipulate you to get you to do what I want you to do. That's envy. Covetousness is I want your stuff. Envy is I want your choices. And God won't even go there. God's not even going to grab your choices and make them be something. And strife is where I strive with you to get it. I'm using my abilities to get you now to do in fusion what I want you to do. Maybe for you it's procrastination. Man, I procrastinate about everything, just everything. For you, maybe procrastination is high anxiety and just like I'm in a double bind. I don't like what I feel here. I don't like my options, so I'm just gonna I'm just gonna go get some ice cream. Maybe anxiety shows up for you as no joy. What's no joy? No joy is here we go. I'm so afraid that what just happened that I should have joy about, I can't have joy about because the other shoe's going to drop, the bottom's going to fall out, life is going to get crappy real quick. So I can't have joy. It's foreboding. So anxiety says do not celebrate or be present in today or this moment because tomorrow is going to be screwed over for you. Then things like emotional fusion. Emotional fusion's where I just walk around and the anxiety in me says I have to fuse with you. If you don't like something I'm saying or doing, I can't be happy with me. I can't be fulfilled. I can't be satisfied because you're upset. And so then you get irritated. And then this is what you say. I don't care what anybody thinks about me. Anxiety. When you say, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. The energy behind it, we all can see and smell and taste. It's everywhere. We all know that the only reason you said, I don't care what anybody thinks, because you're anxious and it's your way of protecting the wounded heart. Then we move to things like drama. Y'all ever talk to anybody and it's just one thing, there's another, and they're just talking and it's just drama. And it's not that they gave a backstory or they gave insight of something, it's that it's fused with anxiety and you feel it and you're like sucked into it. And here's the thing. As Christians, we love movies so much, and movies are filled with drama. In fact, they're dramas. And when we watch them, we get so sucked into them, it's so natural that when we are hanging with a group of people and are an individual and they're telling us this big drama, we're captivated by the tension. Not having any idea that there's a virus, and it's moving from person to person. It moves to gossip. Sometimes we use mechanisms like stoicism or sage, being a sage, if I'm smarter than everybody else, I think with an illusion that I can control my anxiety. Power and dominance, irritations. Do you know if you're irritated or frustrated about anything, there's anxiety generating it? Doesn't that irritate you? So frustrating. And then anger and rage. Anger and rage. If you're angry about a thing and raging about a thing, it is an anxiety presentation. Or addictions. Did you know that every addiction is not about the addiction? 100%. Now, those of you who don't know, you may be thinking I'm talking out of my ear, which sometimes I might. But right here, in this moment, I'm talking to you as an authority. I happen to be certified as an addiction professional with the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. I have had intensive training about what goes into addiction. The training is the reason I don't have panic attacks anymore. Because I learned that every addiction, I didn't have the addictions that we were studying, but every addiction has an anxiety that's driving it. Every addiction. So to just simply put a Band-Aid on it or structure around it or say, we've got to create organization around the addiction. Wait. If you don't get to the root of that and deal with the anxiety that's driving it, you're going to have a binge purge cycle. A binge is, I'm going after it. I do 100 things at one time. I just go all in an immersive experiencing of the addiction. And then purge is that I end up, in purging, I'm able to white knuckle it and discipline my way out of it. And then things like unfaithfulness and betrayal in relationships. Have you ever betrayed somebody? You ever been betrayed? Anybody ever been unfaithful to you? You ever been unfaithful to somebody else? In any kind of way. All of it is driven by your anxiety. This isn't something that you just goof around with. And yet, what's crazy is we go through 12 years of school, and then if we go to college, we go to 4 more years. Then if we get a master's, depending on how long it takes you to do a master's, you could be like 50. A PhD, and very little, if any, instruction to you is given around anxiety. And yet it's driving everything in your life. Everything. Now, what's crazy is you have dysfunctional. That means you can't function. It's something that disrupts. It sabotages you. But did you know that there's functional anxiety? This is functional anxiety. A lot of people are like, anxiety, the Bible says you got to always have faith over fear. Wait. I get why we say that. I've said it, you said it, we all said it. But I want you just for a minute, slow down. Everything you do is because of anxiety. Good, bad, ugly. Good, bad, ugly. Everything, if you didn't have anxiety, you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. Not all anxiety is dysfunctional. And this is where it gets paradoxical. This is where it gets confusing because it's like, oh, wait a minute. I'm supposed to get rid of all anxiety. Wait. Because didn't Paul say, don't worry, don't have anxiety about anything? Well, you got to read it in its context. When I look at all of these things, I'm telling you right now, all of these things, whether it's being loving, contemplative, goal-oriented, spiritual, organized, compassionate, high-achieving, boundary, differentiated, proactive, structured, outgoing, punctual, motivated, sensitive, low-maintenance, all that stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you what healthy functional anxiety gives you. Now, see, that sounds unbiblical. It sounds untrue. I also want you to see that every one of these can easily become dysfunctional. So every glory can have a shadow side. You could actually be a person who loves structure. Tina? And yet the structure be something that it gives you the illusion of protection. Rather than something that out of freedom allows you to have better results. The same thing about any one of these. Think about somebody who is compassionate or empathetic. I know somebody. You know somebody? I know somebody. Who is the glory side of them is they are so present. They're just so connected. They talk to you and you just feel like, you're amazing. You're amazing. But because I also do therapeutic work with them, I know their family of origin in terms of backstory. I know the wounds, the traumas, the weaknesses. And this person will get into an environment where a high-capacity, powerful personality is, and they will immediately go into a submissive zone and ask questions that are airhead questions because they feel so much safer that I will belong and I can survive if I come at this as though I am so empathetic and compassionate and so surrendered. So the glory side turns into the shadow side. For this person, they don't show up. For this person, they won't present. They won't allow themselves to stand up to the commitment of who they are, what they believe. And I just want to say that if you do not stand up for what you believe, you can't grow. Even if you're wrong. And yet in our world, this is not true. In our world, we will get exploited and mocked. I mean, you could just say one thing wrong and the entire internet is going to create a reel for you, right? They're going to have a meme made out of you and you're going to be everywhere. And so what we do, we decide, I feel anxious about that. I'm going to make a decision to never commit to believe anything. And what you don't commit to believe or value or have an opinion on, you can't grow in. You just can't grow. So when I look at all of this, you may be thinking, wait, Jesus said don't worry. Isn't it sin to worry or have anxiety? Isn't it sin? Paul says be anxious for nothing. Well, it's interesting. Paul also said this. God has put the body, the church, community together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal anxiety for each other. Same Greek word that the word anxiety is translated as anxiety that Paul said, same Greek word that Jesus used. It's telling us that there's healthy, functional anxiety. And yet that same anxiety can become very detrimental and destructive and toxic in our lives. Paul later says this, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy. Timothy was a young preacher and a pastor. He said, I'm going to send him to you that I also may be cheered when I receive the news about you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine anxiety for your welfare. Exact same Greek word. So what's my point? My point is that we have anxiety that helps us to address. It is a gift from God that we would be awakened to say something is going on, there is a threat, there is an injustice, and I can do something about it. I can move towards it. That's a blessing. Yet, for most of us, and so I'm not going to say most, retract the word most, all is a better word, of us have dysfunctional anxiety. And now you may be thinking, I don't. I'm like the chillest person you ever met. Anxiety. Anxiety. When the Bible says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, where do you think the sin came from? So if you don't have anxiety, you don't sin anymore. In fact, every behavior is going to come from anxiety. So what are you going to do? How are you going to manage to be in the healthy part of anxiety versus the unhealthy part of anxiety? So if you think about it, you have a midline. A midline is where everything below is functional, assuming that it's not driven by an anxiety thing. Now, the difference of a healthy versus an unhealthy approach to anxiety is if you're healthy, you're moving from a place of freedom And now you get to go do some things. You get to present compassion. You get to be spiritual. You get to operate in discipline, but you're doing it out of freedom. In other words, I'm not trying to perform. Performance is that if I could just get one of these things, if I could just do something, if I could just accomplish, if I could just be a different person, if I could just get all this stuff up here all figured out, if I could just do it and fix it, then I might have a minute apiece around here. Now, what's crazy is all of this recreates anxiety. It generates from anxiety, and then it creates more anxiety. So you're on a gerbil's wheel. You run as fast as you can. I've got to outrun this. I got to outperform it. I got to outbeat it. Now down here, it's, thank you, Jesus, for who you are and what you've done in my heart, what you've done in my soul. You've changed the energy mechanisms inside of me. So now I'm free. I'm free to live with structures because structures are helpful. I'm free to be loving and energized. I can execute on an objective. I can be proactive. Now what you may be thinking is doesn't this up here create better results? Now y'all know I'm a geek around neuroscience. Dr. Kristen Neff has research paper after research paper, and these are all evidential and empirical research. They have all been stamped as authoritative. And it shows over and over again when a person sees themselves with freedom, loving themselves before in action, they will always perform at a much higher level. Perform being they will produce much greater results. So start from freedom. Start from freedom. You're free. Start there. So if you think about it this way, I've taken the negatives all and put them on this side. Now we're in vertical. I've taken the positives and put them on this side. I'm curious, what do you do if you have things that you're like, I don't like it that I'm so controlling. I don't like that I'm always irritated. I don't like that I rage. I don't like that I'm in an addiction. I don't like all this. I don't like the anxiety around this. So you know what our tendency is? You know what our tendency is? Is that we don't like the feelings on this side. We don't like the anxiety on this side, so we stuff it. And in stuffing it, we don't feel anything. And so people will say, I just don't know why I can't feel Jesus anymore. I go to church and I worship and I just can't seem to feel his heart, his soul, his presence like I used to. I wonder if we explored what you're smashing over on this side, if it's smashing this on this side. Used to, I had such a passion to preach the gospel, somebody will say. Used to, I loved to serve. Used to, I loved to come when we'd have haircuts for turkeys. But these are years ago when everybody had afros, bell-bottom pants. Today, I don't have that passion anymore. I wonder if we explored your story, if we would find that your way of managing your anxiety is to smash it. Now, what's crazy is you can smash it all you want, but it ain't going away. It's going to pop up in your life in ways that's going to embarrass you. It's going to cause you to have loss and grief. It's wild. And here's what I want you to know. The anxiety you stuff will ultimately stuff you. And the anxiety you don't process is ultimately going to process you. And I just want you to know, when I say stuff, I mean when people think that they're going to fix their anxiety, you can't fix anxiety. What I want to do is control it. That's awesome. You can't. What you can do is go to the roots, find out where they came from, and reprocess them so that they become something that serve you rather than something that controls or dominates you. When you try to control anxiety, the first thing you'll do is have anxiety about anxiety because you're like, I didn't control it. That makes me anxious. Wild, isn't it? Whenever you see anxiety show up in your life that's moving in an unhealthy way, first thing you need to do is say, hey, what you doing, anxiety? I see you're here. That's good. Cool. All right, now I don't have to pay attention to you. Now I don't have to give you the worth that you're desiring from me. You're here. I acknowledge you're here. Now then I can do the deeper work. When I look at where did anxiety come from, get this. I'm going to geek on you just for a minute. The brain, everybody say the brain. When you're born, there's a part of the brain that is where anxiety is housed through a biochemical called cortisol. It's housed in this area called the amygdala. When you're born, the amygdala, which is where anxiety gets to spinning, the amygdala, when you're born, it's primarily fully developed. So you have massive emotional experiencing as a baby, like you would as an adult. Can you imagine taking adult emotion, shoving it down into a baby's brain? The amygdala is primarily developed when you're born. But as you could witness with a baby, they don't know how to talk, so there's no language connections. The language centers of the brain don't go in neural pathways to connect with these emotions. You can't describe them, no context there. And then when it comes to the hippocampus, I'm not talking about zoology, but hippocampus. The hippocampus is a part of the brain where you get context connected to the emotions. So you had an injury, somebody said something, somebody did something, etc. They would have connections. That actually doesn't develop till you're 15. Fully. There's a lot of emotions happening. And then the braking system of your emotions is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex, which is your rationale, your reasoning. You know, anybody who's ever had a teenager said, "What were you thinking?" And you know what they were thinking? Nothing. The prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop till you're 25. So what ends up happening is in the brain, in that first year of life, you are learning how to adapt for belonging and survival to your primary caretakers. And you're witnessing without language, without context, you're witnessing what is the anxieties in my mom, what's the anxieties in my dad, what's the anxieties in my siblings, how are they interacting? And each one, my brain as a baby is customizing how I'm going to adapt to each figure in my family. And then from that, I build this entire template of how I will deal with every relationship in my future. And so when you're 40, in your marriage, your wife says something very simple to you. Your wife just simply asks you a question. And you take it as though you're an idiot. And the reason you do is because your amygdala says, remember when you were a kid, you mapped out these templates that you're in danger of being an idiot. If you're an idiot, you won't belong and you can't survive. And there is no context to you. You don't really know why, and you don't have language for it, and there are no rational reasons. It's just blah. Because you haven't processed, not fixed, not controlled, but you haven't processed that anxiety, you end up yelling at your wife. And then your wife, because she grew up in a family where she always heard that you're not doing enough, now she's hearing what you're saying as though that everything she presented in that moment is about that you don't care what she's done. She just asked you a question. Now then you have in your viral anxiety, you've thrown a fire thrower on her and you created accelerant for her. So now she's on fire and both of you think you're fighting about something and you're not even fighting about what you think you're fighting about. Crazy. Because we end up taking OCD focus on verbal content of the fight rather than the emotional process in the fight. Anxiety. It's wild. Anxiety. And so I think, where in the Bible did this all come from? Catch this real quick. Start wrapping this up. Genesis chapter 3. How it all began. Oh, Adam and Eve. Eve also gave some forbidden fruit to Adam, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized that they were naked. This isn't good naked. This is anxious naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. I want you to notice what fear will cause you to do. Fear will be intolerant of exposure for who I really am. I can't be seen for who I am. I've got to do a manufactured presentation of a fig leaf. I've got you to believe something about me that isn't true of me. They sowed fig leaves. And then Adam and Eve heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid. What does anxiety cause you to do? Cause you to hide. You cannot tolerate being you. You can't tolerate showing up and being honest. Whenever you are feeling stupid, rather than just fire throwing and accelerating the anxiety in your spouse, what if you just stopped? And you're like, oh, I'm getting crazy. I'm flooded. I'm overwhelmed. Honey, I feel like I'm stupid right now. I feel like I'm an idiot. I just need you to see me. Do you know that'll change the direction of your fight? You're like, can you really do that? It takes a lot of exercise. It takes a lot of practice. I'm not 100% good at it, but I'm better at it today than I've ever been at it. Because we fight about stuff that we think we're fighting about when that's not what we're fighting about. We're under threat of survival and belonging. They hid themselves. And then notice the Lord says, where are you, Adam? And what's cool is that God's omniscient. He's like, I'm just looking for you, Adam. Where are you at? But he already knows where he's at. So why is he asking? Because he needs Adam to come clean and name it so he can tame it. You got to acknowledge things. You got to know things to grow things. You've got to mind things to unwind things. You got to know where some of this stuff came from. So he calls to him and he said, I heard you walking in the garden. I was afraid. I had anxiety. And the reason I did is because I was naked. I saw myself and I was ashamed of it and I hid myself. So I'm curious about this. I'm curious how you would answer these questions. What are you threatened by? What's your nakedness? What consistently comes up in your life that you're threatened by? That you feel like you're not enough, you're not valuable, you're not worthy, and I'm under threat that people are going to leave me and I won't have a life and I won't survive. What are you threatened by? I'm threatened by a lot of stuff. I'm threatened by being stupid. Some people have complimented me over the years as to how smart I am. It's like, today, I'm a lot better at managing the anxiety that causes me to read and research and et cetera, and God has given me gifts, but you know a lot of that started because I just couldn't tolerate being naked. I couldn't tolerate being stupid because I was told I was stupid. I was an ignoramus, and it threatened my sense of belonging in groups. It's wild, isn't it? Another thing is man, when somebody asks me a question, you guys don't know this, but when somebody asks me a question, I have anxiety about being exploited, being mocked and made fun of for not knowing. You know, one of the biggest anxieties of a pastor is playing Bible trivia in a small group. And for me, because of my childhood, if any kind of weakness was shown, I was exploited. My amygdala says, map out, alarm, 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 and it catastrophizes the results. And so I'm asking you, what are you threatened by? And then, how do you cover it? What's your fig leaf? How do you present yourself so that you can beat it, so that you can overperform it, so you can make it tolerable? What do you do? Do you hide? Do you get quiet? Do you show up in big personality? Do you yell? What do you do? What is your go-to? I think it's interesting, don't you? And this happens in families. This happens in boardrooms. This happens in churches. It happens everywhere. And it's really about anxiety. And it's a virus, and it's a pandemic. I can tell you for me, in my leadership of ministry, I've been leading in ministry for 35 years as a senior leader, 35 plus. As I look at what I just taught you today, Had I known what I'm talking to you about and known what to do with the anxiety at the deeper levels, my whole life could have been different. Much healthier, much stronger. Tina wouldn't have scars where I wounded her. My boys wouldn't have had the scars. And yet, I've got to today look at all of that and say to myself, yeah, that is true. I'm not going to ignore that, hide that, or make it better than it is. But I love you, Pat. I love you. I'm for you. I've got your back. I've got the mercy of God. I've got the goodness of God. When you look at your life, what are you threatened by? And what do you use? What mechanisms do you use to cover? I know somebody who, because of their traumatic injuries, emotionally and relationally from childhood up, they would do things like be hyper generous. And what it was is, I'm going to pay off to get results. I have a client whose dad was an alcoholic, and mom knew about it and would send her as a teenager to go and to take care of all of this chaos in the family. Dad might be drunk. You got to go to the bar and you've got to rescue him. What is all of that? This is building within a child that my go-to when I feel anxiety, if I can control everybody else, if I can fix everybody else, if I can rescue and think ahead before they get there, I can be okay. What ends up happening is that person turns into a very depressed or hyper-functioning, toxic individual. They get married, and then the next thing you know, and I'm not saying this client, but somebody gets married in that case, and the next thing you have is you've got these wars, and you're like, what is it that's sabotaging me? What is it? And so James writes about this, and he says this. This is what a wise person does. A wise person shows up as who they really are. They don't have to be flawless or perfect to be seen. They show up for who they really are, and this is the wisdom that's above. It's peaceable, where nothing's broken, nothing's missing. There's no driving toxic anxiety here. And then he says, without hypocrisy, because this is what anxiety does. It causes you to be a hypocrite. What's a hypocrite? It's the ancient Greek word for be a stage actor. In other words, this isn't really you. This is what you present. You present that you're dominant. You present that you have everything figured out. You present that you're the funny one. I've got a person that I think of who goes into an environment and they are a lightning rod of energy. And they're the kind of person you take to environments that you need to have lit up. And so that they're awesome. But I've also been their therapeutic support. And so much of what they do there in hyper-serving everybody and hyper-encouraging everybody and being the energy in the room is that I can't tolerate not being seen. Mom and Dad got a divorce. I didn't feel seen during that. Throughout my life, I didn't feel emotionally seen. They took care of me with food. They loved me. There's no question about that. But I didn't feel seen. So the way that I can feel okay and the illusion of control of that anxiety is I've got to be the lightning rod. Now, you should be the lightning rod out of freedom. The gift is still there. This is the difference in being healthy and unhealthy. So there's two things I want to encourage you to do. Whenever you start feeling toxic anxiety and you start thinking about the fig leaf you need to wear, just simply add to that, you know what? Jesus died for that, so I don't have to. Jesus died for me to be flawed. Jesus died so that I could be wrong. Jesus died so that I could have embarrassing moments. Jesus died so that I don't have to do the overfunctioning. I don't have to be overstructured. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be whatever the inner voice is telling me I have to be. Because Jesus died for that. Now, where am I getting that? In the story of the Garden of Eden, right after they sowed fig leaves, you know what what God did there? God said, no, I'm going to put animal clothes on you. Because God likes leather. Actually, what God likes is a covenant. So he sacrifices animals. It's a covenant act, and it's the symbol of Jesus one day dying for us. So what Jesus does is he becomes the I don't have to's anymore. I don't have to control a moment. I feel like, how many of you ever feel like you got to get the last word? Come on, somebody. Come on. I am the ultimate, because I feel the injustice. What if they go away from this thinking that they're right and I haven't told them that they're wrong? Y'all are going to be praying a lot more for Tina. And me. And me. But what I love is I can say, you know what, Jesus, in that moment, Jesus, you died so I don't have to have the last word. You died so I don't have to be irritated. You died so I don't have to secure my belonging. God, where are we going to get the money? I feel so anxious. Oh, yeah, Jesus, you died so I don't have to worry about my money. Isn't that amazing? And then the last part is thanksgiving. And that's because in Philippians chapter 4, when he says don't be anxious for anything, right after that he says make your prayers be with thanksgiving and let your requests be known. What's thanksgiving do? So I'm going to wrap this up. Pastor Allison, she says this at the beginning of the service, that when you're thankful, you get your eyes off of everything that's wrong. And that is absolutely true. Geek out with your brain. Whenever you become thankful and it's an emotional presence where you begin to embody, oh yeah, I want to think about all the good things. I've got food, I've got family, I've got good things, I've got people, I've got friends. Instead of thinking about all the friends you don't have, think about the friends you do have. Somebody does love you. You're in church today. Somebody loves you. I promise you. So begin to be thankful but emotionally present. Now here's what happens. This amygdala is firing off the anxiety from a biochemical called cortisol. When you begin to have thanksgiving and gratitude, or when you start having empathy and compassion for anybody, there is a neurochemical called oxytocin. It is the love hormone. It's what bonds moms to children. It's what causes husbands and wives to have this connection to each other. Oxytocin is released out of the brain, goes to the amygdala, calms the cortisol release, and then moves you to the nucleus accumbens. In there you have dopamine that makes you feel like, I love life. And see, this whole time you just thought it was magic. Not magic. It's your body. So, my exhortation for you today, I'd like to ask the band to come forward. My exhortation for you today is become deeply aware of the anxieties going on, what their narratives are in you. Learn how to process them. Learn how to gain. And if you want to have more support in that, go to our Red Ink Revival platform at Red Ink Revival, I-N-K, redinkrevival.com. I've got podcasts every week. Now, it's pretty high grade. A lot of people tell me that it's way over their head. It may be over your head, but I promise you it's not over your heart. Might be over your head, but it's not over your heart. And if you'll stick in with it, you'll begin to reprocess your life, and maybe you won't have to suffer like I suffered with panic attacks for so many years. I want to pray for you.